All right, well, welcome. Hopefully I've eliminated that little snippet at the front, but we're going to, do that again probably. Today, I wanted to talk about buyer representation agreements. I don't know if any of you have heard this, but the market seems to have shifted. Right? I'm going to stop sharing for a second. The market seems to have shifted. Have you heard that? I don't know if you guys are aware that it's not quite the intense seller's market that it was last year or the year before. And what happens when the market is shifting is that there's oftentimes a movement, let's say of power or influence, or however you want to put it, from sellers to buyers. There was a time when having a buyer wasn't worth as much, because we're writing offers and there's 20 other offers and people are bidding hundreds of thousands of dollars over the list price and they're offering all cash and they don't have any contingencies. And I wrote more than 20 offers for one couple before I got an offer accepted. Well, it's not quite like that anymore. And so I was going to begin a series on how to effectively work with buyers in the market that we're in right now. What's curious is when I went and looked at some of the scripts and things that I used to teach back in the day, the interest rates are the same as they are today. Some of the objections are pretty much the same objections. Well, what if prices are going to go down? Maybe I should wait. And we're going to discuss that. Now, next week, we were scheduled to do a session on and yes, I am recording. I believe so, yes. We were going to do a session on Tuesday on handling objections, but because of an emergency, that's being put off until next Tuesday. I'm going to be doing a session on how to get buyers, what to say to buyers, and the buyer consultation, but I felt a need to sort of jump ahead and talk about buyer representation agreements. And that's because I get this question often. And this is how the question often goes, right? Somebody, oftentimes a brand new agent, who is part of my team. For some of you, you may know I have what EXP calls a mega icon team. I have 74 salespeople that are on my team, ranging from the southern part of San Diego all the way up to Eureka. And so among that group, there are some people that have a lot more experience and some people are brand new. And this is what I often hear, right? So the agent, a newer agent, sometimes a used agent, but usually a newer agent, has been going through EXP's training. They've been watching videos on the internet about working with buyers. And what everyone says is you shouldn't show property, right, unless you have a buyer representation agreement, a buyer broker agreement, a buyer agency agreement. Those are all terms that sort of mean the same thing. So this is the question I get. The agent texts me and says, I'm showing property Saturday morning, right? I just talked to somebody, a few minutes ago. Should I send them a buyer representation agreement to sign before I go show property? Should I do that, right? That's the kind of questions I get. Now, in the abstract, right, the answer, I guess, is yes, right? In that it would behoove you, or I don't know, maybe just hoove you, but anyhow, it would probably be a good idea that you have an established working relationship with the buyer before you go show property. But we need to think about this a little bit. Because if all you do is email them through DocuSign or digital ink, a buyer representation agreement to sign without discussing it, they may not work. Now, sometimes it does. Some of my newer agents have said, well, I sent one to my buyer and they just signed it. Well, congratulations. But I've been doing this for a while and they don't always just sign them. Sometimes the buyer reads it. They read it. And then they start making a list of questions. And if you're brand new, this is sort of tough because there can be some pretty tough questions about those different agreements. If we looked at a sales system a sales process. Step one is you would be having conversations with people about buying, selling, or investing in real estate. That's step one. Step two is those conversations would lead to an appointment. So what are you doing in your conversation with buyers? The answer is you're creating an opportunity for you to have an appointment or a consultation with them about buying real estate. Then at the appointment is when we make a presentation to show them that we can help them get what they want when it comes to buying a property. If all that goes well, the conversation goes well, the appointment goes well, then the next step is we would have them sign, we would create a client realtor relationship through the use of a buyer representation agreement. After that, we would be showing them property. Then we would be writing offers. Then we would be closing transactions. And then you'd be out buying a new car, right? When the transaction closed. Those are the steps. And although the buyer representation agreement is a part of that process, it is not the first part of the process. It's not the second part of the process. If you want to know what metrics you ought to be tracking as a real estate agent, one of them is how many conversations do you have every day with people that are interested in buying, selling, or investing in real estate, and people that are not real estate agents. You understand, if you're in an office or you have friends that are in real estate and you talk to them, that doesn't count, right? Because they're not going to let you write an offer for them, right? So you ought to be tracking how many conversations you have on a daily basis. It doesn't have to be a huge number. If you want to make a lot of money in real estate, you ought to be talking to maybe 20 people a day. If you talk to 10 people a day, you'd be making money. If you talk to 2 or 3 people a day, if you talk to 2 people a day about real estate, 2, and you did that 5 days a week, so you talked to 10 people a week, and you did that 4 weeks in a month, and you were talking to 40 people a month, and you did that for 10 months, you would have talked to 400 people, and you'd be making money. So one of the, and by the way, once you get paid for talking to people, it's a lot easier to talk to more people. The second metric you ought to be tracking is how many appointments do you have in order on a weekly, monthly basis. You might want to assume that you're going to need 4 appointments before you close a transaction. You might need 4 appointments. So you might need to talk to 50 people, let's say 40, because I can kind of do that math. So you understand, if you have to be talking to a certain number of people to get an appointment, you have to have a certain number of appointments to get a client. And over time, as you become better at talking and better at appointments, your ratios will get better. Right now, after a good presentation, it's possible to get people to sign buyer representation agreements. But and I know some of you are maybe brand new and some of you are not so new. But sometimes agents are asking me, should I send them a buyer representation agreement to sign before I show them property? And I know that agent doesn't know how to use their lockbox key. I know that, right? They've never opened up a house, right, with their lockbox key, which is why in my launch program for new agents, one of the things that I suggest you do is learn how to use your lockbox key. Go to vacant houses and open them up. You don't want to be struggling with this while the buyers are watching you. Do you know how to use the multiple listing service? Some agents don't, right? They go, I got a buyer and I want them to sign a buyer representation agreement. How do I find homes to show them? Well, your MLS has classes. Have you taken any of the classes? No, I haven't done that yet. Do you know how to show homes? I have videos on how to find and show homes. Have you ever watched them? Do you know what to do when you're showing a home? Sometimes the agent says, no, I haven't watched any of those videos. I don't know what I'm doing. But I want them to sign an agreement before I start that obligates them to work for me forever. That's what I want. I want them to sign a binding contract that says if they ever buy a house, I get to be their agent. In fact, I'd like the contract to say if their children and grandchildren ever decide to buy a house, they have to use me as a realtor. Isn't that what we want? But if you don't even know how to open up the door, you don't know how to write a purchase agreement, you've studied nothing, you understand that we all know why we want them to sign these agreements. Here's the tough question. Why do they want to sign one of these agreements? What's in it for them? Now, yes, Raul asked me if I should be sharing my screen. Not yet. Why would a buyer be concerned, Brenda asks, about the commission if the seller pays the commission? Very good question. I'm going to get to that. Juan wants a new car, so do I. If you don't have a buyer representation agreement, then what is the default setting of your relationship? This is it. The default setting is whichever agent finds them the house they want to buy, that's going to be their agent, not necessarily you. So many buyers see this like a horse race. They'll say, well, I'd like Sonia to be my agent on the west side, and Joe can be my agent on the north side, and Fidel can be my agent on the south side, and Louise can be my agent on the east side, and go, right? And whichever one of you finds me the house I like first, then I'm going to buy it from you. Do you understand, if you're the agent, this is probably not the best situation. Is it okay to have them fill out the form before they put in their first offer? We want them to fill out the form and make the agreement. So let me just put it this way. The form is not the important part of this, right? The form is not the important part of this. The important part is for you to be able to make a presentation to them that convinces them that they're going to get a better deal if they work exclusively with you than if they work with any real estate agent they happen to run across. What we're looking for is loyalty. And if you want them to agree to work with you, what you have to be able to do is speak in the terms of what's in it for them. Right? You understand, if I simply say to the buyer, well, I don't want to waste my time showing you property just to have you go to a new home subdivision and buy a house and me not get paid. So I want you to sign this agreement that says I'm going to get paid no matter what you do. Well, why would they do that? Right? Unless you can explain it to them. And so that's what we're going to talk about a little bit now. And if you're wondering how to handle the buyers asking the buyer agent credit, so Stanley asks, well, what if they want to have a credit towards their commission? Is it common? And the answer is, in certain areas, certain communities, an agent giving a rebate to the buyer is, in fact, can be common. Most of what I do is I help my team members, but my last personal transaction was in Saratoga. I paid a 20% referral fee. I gave the buyer a 50% credit from the buyer side commission. Now, some of you are probably thinking, well, I'd never do that. You know, that's crazy. Who would ever do that? It was terrible. I only made $32,000. Isn't that awful? Isn't that horrible? Right? I only made $32,000. I mean, what would happen if I did that every week? Wouldn't that be horrible? So do you understand? It was a $4 million house. So to me, the question isn't necessarily about the percentage. The question is, what do you need to do to get the client to close the transaction? See, I have this theory for people that are new to real estate or even used. And my theory is, particularly if you're new, this applies. Why not learn the business and make some money? How about that? In my area, which is in Silicon Valley, there are agents that have billboards that say they'll give a credit. Billboards, right? Write up the offer with me, I'll give you a credit. Now, you can either choose to play that game or not. And by the way, if you've got anything 2 million and above where they want a credit and you don't want to do it because you have principles, send them to me. Because I don't have, I'll do it. Just send them to me. Right now, if it was a $600,000 condo, well, no, right? Does everybody understand? Is it, you get the idea. So I've given credit to buyers. And in fact, I have an affinity program with Key Point Credit Union where anybody from their credit union that uses me as a real estate agent, I give a rebate to the buyer, right? 20%. And by the way, my name and contact information is on their website. How many lenders' websites have your contact information on it for their members? How many of you? Right? Would it be worth giving something in order to get that? See, commissions have gotten crazy too with prices. Right? We're looking at, because if you look at what is 2.5% of 4 million, you know, it's like $100,000. I'd be willing to negotiate in order to close that transaction all the time. All right, so Roz is getting nervous that I'm never going to share my screen. So I'm going to do that. So let's talk about a couple of things first. What is it that you ought to be good at if you're a real estate agent? All right, and this is a list, and I've actually seen agents take a list like this and just pretty much the way it is, put a border around it. So these are what we would call the value propositions. Now, I'm going to be doing a business planning clinic in the next few weeks, probably held at an association of realtors, broadcast on the internet. And when you're creating a business plan, one of the components of your business plan ought to be what I call the product. Right? You ought to have part of your business plan as to how am I going to get buyers, and part of your business plan is how am I going to get sellers, and part of your business plan ought to be the product, and the product, well, that's you. You're the product. Do you understand? As a real estate agent, we don't sell houses. We don't sell houses. What buyers buy houses and sellers sell houses, what we sell, this is an important distinction, what we sell is a package of services to help buyers and sellers and investors. That's what we're selling. So in order to get people to agree to work with us, the question is, how good is your package of services? How articulate are you in explaining to somebody what your services are and why they're valuable? Now, that's oftentimes called the value proposition. So these are the different steps. This is just for buyers that you would want to go through with them. Analyzing their wants and needs. Sometimes that takes a little bit of time because they don't always know what they want and need. Getting them set up with financing, getting them information on neighborhoods, helping them with the search process, helping them write an offer. I have videos on how to know what to offer, what to do when you're writing an offer. It might be good to watch them before you write an offer. How to negotiate, how to coordinate vendors, what you need to do as an agent pre-close, what do you need to do at closing, what do you need to do post-closing. You understand? These are the 10 major service areas of a buyer proposition. And my suggestion would be, if you want somebody to agree to work with you exclusively, you ought to be able to explain to them, this is what you're going to do. Now, what I'm going to be doing, EXP, God bless EXP, has come up with a new buyer consultation materials. They have a mobile version, they have a new one. I'm probably going to be doing that in a day or two, or a week or two, something like that. And one of the things that I've included for you guys, there'll be a class on that, is something called the real estate buyer presentation. I'm not going to go through all of this right now, but the part at the beginning is something I just wanted to cover. So how would this actually look? And the part at the beginning is all those statistics. Let's say I've met a buyer at an open house, and I'm talking to them and I'm asking them questions like, what was it about this one that caught your eye? And how many homes have you been looking for? And how many homes have you seen? And why haven't you bought one yet? And are you working with an agent? Have you talked to a lender? Do you know how much you're going to be qualified for? Do you currently own or do you rent? And then one of the questions that I might ask them after I find out that they're not committed to an agent right now is that they might, if you would like to get the best deal possible in a market like we're in today, it would help if you had a knowledgeable, committed real estate professional working for you. And I would like to have the opportunity to apply for the position of being your real estate agent. I'd like to do that. Right? And I've had people laugh and go, oh, that sounds nice. And so I stopped meeting people at offices years before COVID. But usually what I would do is I say, now, in order to discuss the process and everything, it's only going to take 15 minutes. That's an important thing, right? If you've got a buyer consultation that's going to last an hour or two, give it up, right? You know, that's called a seminar. But I might say, well, why don't we go look at some properties on Saturday? And before we go, we're going to meet at a Starbucks, right? Because they're, you know, they're everywhere. And in 15 minutes, I want to go through the process. And the reason we're doing this is the goal is to help you get the best deal possible when you're buying a home in the market they're in right now. I mean, you do want to get the best deal possible, don't you? And if they say yes, okay, 15 minutes, I rather than calling it an appointment to them, I would call it a pre-showing briefing. I'll buy coffee, right? We'll be done before you're done with your coffee. Right, just a pre-showing brief, a game plan, so we know what we're doing. So, okay, we're at Starbucks. I usually carry with me, it's in someplace. I have a Chromebook, which I take with me that is light, it boots up fast. I can look at what's on the MLS easily and talk to them. Most people have heard of Redfin and Zillow and Realtor.com, so they're able to find homes on their own. But what would be the things that we would talk about? So I'm sitting here, they're sitting across from me, we're having a coffee. One of the things that I would talk about first is I would want to give them an update on what's going on in the market. Now, this is, some of you I know are not in the matrix world of MLS software. Some of you are in Paragon. Some of you are in Rapatoni. Those are all names of different softwares. But let's just say my client is looking for a single family home. And one of the things that I might do just because I want it to be quick is there's a preset called average DOM and sale to list price ratio. And I click on that. And there's a little chart. And what I do once I run the chart is I go over to print. And then at the bottom, there's a link that says show tabular data. That's kind of important. And what this is telling me, and let me go back. I should have done one thing first, but I'm going too quickly. Let me go back to here. I forgot to put in the city or county. So let's say San Jose. How about that? Right? They want to buy a house in San Jose. I want average days on market, sale to list price ratio. Sometimes I print this out. Sometimes I put it in a PDF packet, like a Google folder, like I'm sharing with you, which I can share with them. I add the tabular data. And what this is showing, let's look at, and so I actually talk about this with the buyer. Currently, in September 2022, The average seller in San Jose, single family home, got a little bit more than what they were asking for. They got 100.3% of the list price once it closed. The lowest you can see in the last 12 months was 99.9%. So the market, you read, haven't you, that the market is softened. But does that necessarily, what that oftentimes means that the number of closed transactions are down, it doesn't necessarily mean that people are giving away their properties. Can everybody understand why discussing what the sale price to list price ratio is could be critical in educating our buyer as to what's going on in the market? Is it possible that our buyers, because they're, reading what they see on the internet, are convinced that it's a buyer's market and the market has crashed and they can lowball sellers, they can offer 10% under list price, and they're going to get it because everything is falling apart? Isn't that true? That people might think that, but that's not the case, right? On average, sellers are getting what they're asking for. Do you understand? We don't want buyers to go out with the mindset that they can offer, that they can lowball and still get the property. How long is the average days to sell? In San Jose, single family home average sold in 27 days. Now that may seem like eternity when you're looking at 9 days and 10 days and things like that. But having been around a while, 27 days is not a long time for a house in a normal market to be on the market. That's not a long time yet. Does everybody understand what I'm saying? Homes sell in under a month for what they're asking, 100%. Now, Los Angeles numbers are not the same. San Diego numbers are not the same. San Francisco numbers are not the same. But one of the things that I would like to do is to discuss with them quickly what's going on with the market. So some of these are really easy. Months of inventory, right? Months of inventory is a measurement of the month. What am I doing? Copy of months of inventory. That didn't look good. Let me go back. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this. One of the reasons that I shared is this available in MetroList. MetroList uses a program called Rapatoni, and Rapatoni, which is used in San Francisco, it's used in northern, Marin County, Sonoma, Solano, Napa County, and in MetroList, Rapatoni has something called Trends, which is very similar to this. How do you recommend to sign BRE without scaring them away? How to approach? We're going to get to that. All right. So I think we're going to get to that. So one of the other things that I included in here for those of you that are not good with statistics, where is my buyer presentation? This is it here, is a bunch of links, right? NAR. The ones that I would focus on is if you go to like the second to the last one. This is from the California Association of Realtors, and they have something called a home buyer's guide. And when you click on it, it's updated about the 15th of the month. It starts with LA, because I guess size matters. And here are all the different places. Let's say I'm interested in Los Angeles. There's a letter, Instagram, and a Facebook or PPT, which is PowerPoint. And if I click on it, it's going to show me a quick, easy, is that me or is it blur? Oh, there we go. And it shows what the current interest rate is, last month's interest rate, last year's interest rate. Ooh. What does it look like with 20% down, 3% down, depending upon the different kinds of bedrooms and things? Right? How hard was that? Right? Every city, every county, California Association of Realtors has one. So when we're at the appointment, first we're going to talk about a quick what's going on to the market. I would talk to them about whether or not prices are going up and down, right? All of this is available through your MLS. Los Angeles area uses a form of matrix. They have something that looks very much like what I was going through. Most of the MLSs have something like this. Step one, we talk briefly about the market. Step two would be to talk about the process. Now, I have many copies of the different ways of doing it. I'm going to give you, I don't know if I should really do this. Michael Lewis Marketing. Michael Lewis Marketing is a company that originally worked just with Keller Williams. I used to be at KW. Notice they have a thing that says free stuff. Free, that sounds good. All the agents are going, free stuff. They have free stuff. And one of them is a buyer's consultation. And they have a Spanish and they have an English version. And you have to change their, I think I could just put this in that. Oh, why not? Let me just put it someplace where I can find it quickly. And what Michael Lewis Marketing has is, and you have to, if you click on this, you can change the KW logo to EXP. You can change the colors. Most of this I never use. This one page here is the one I use, right? This one page. By the way, EXP has a version of it in their presentation. This one, notice there's no branding on this particular page, right? There's no branding, and it goes through the process. So step one, quickly, let's talk about the market. Step two, let's quickly go through the home buying process, right? I see some of the same people are coming back and forth. And then step three, once we're there, we're going to talk to them about what is the best way to approach this and how we're going to work together. Right? This doesn't necessarily take a long time unless they've got a lot of questions. Let me see. Speaking of questions, I do not see the page. I don't know what that is.
Yeah, we just see a blank white page.
Well, that's horrible. So, how many of you remembered that it was called Michael Lewis Marketing? And it's, you Google search Michael Lewis Marketing. What I'm going to do when I find it is here. I don't know. It's just not wanting to put it into. It just doesn't want to do it. I don't know why. Here, let me close this. Those of you that are in my group, it'll be in my document library, but right now it's just not, my program is not cooperating to let me put it in. So there's nothing I can do about it. My screen froze. Yes, I'm going to try and unfreeze it. Too much stuff, opening up the zip file. All right. Let's go on. You're going to find, let me stop the share for a second. Ra, if you have a moment, you could download that. I think it's in the document library, and drag it into this folder. And then if everybody sends me $1, you know, everyone would have access to it. All right. So let's, I'm not going to continue on trying to make that one page show up, but it's basically michaellewismarketingsuite.com, free stuff, home buyer's guide, right? And how about this? I forget the power of technology. Chat. Here's a link. How about that? Right? Does that make it easier? I need, it's now just set up so it only goes to one person. Because let me, here, try it again. All right, how about that? There you go. By the way, if you Google searched in Google Images, real estate buying, process, you're going to find there's lots of copies of these. All right. So let's talk about buyer representation agreements, right? So I'm going to go through a buyer consultation. The reason I don't have an updated one is because EXP has updated some of their material, and I'm going to be putting things together in sort of my own way with, with the different things. But let's talk about the buyer representation agreements. Now, there's some information I've given you about it. One of them is a slide deck. And this is a slide deck from a seminar done by the California Association of Realtors. And this is their buyer representation agreements and how they work. Now, let me just say that your broker is probably not going to sue a buyer who signs one of these agreements and then doesn't buy with you. That's probably not going to happen. You, as a real estate agent, don't have the standing to sue a buyer on behalf of your broker. The broker would have to do it. So we're not getting somebody to sign this document so that we've set up a successful lawsuit, because that ain't going to happen. Even if your broker said, I'm willing to sue them to get our money, I'm willing to do it, what you're going to find is that no court is ever going to award you a commission when you did not sell them a house and you didn't write the offer. It's just not going to happen. So why are we doing this? There's a couple of reasons. One of which is mentioned by the California Association of Realtors, which means if there is a dispute for procuring cause, and this is something that would be settled by the Association of Realtors or the MLS. And if you have a buyer representation agreement, then there's a presumption that they're your buyer. Also, if you have a buyer representation agreement, there is a code of ethics section that says it is unethical for a real estate agent to steal your client. Do you understand? You're not going to be able, it's unlikely you're ever going to be able to sue them and collect a commission. However, you could get the listing agent thrown out of the board of realtors if they stole your client and you had a buyer representation agreement. Does everybody see that distinction? Right, this is more of the crucifix to the listing agent being the vampire. Then it's a Halloween metaphor. Then it is that we've got them to sign an agreement and we're going to get paid. And if they violate the agreement, we're going to sue and win. You're not going to sue them and you're not going to win. Right? I'm just telling you. But it helps in a procuring cause dispute. There are objections. And there are 3 types. And what I'm going to do, just because I apparently talked too much about the other things, is I'm going to go through the different contracts, right? I'm going to go through the 3. Doesn't take very long because each one is 90% the same. So if you wanted to read the buyer representation agreements, you would log into Zip Forms. And by the way, I have a series of these that are designed for commercial real estate because I have a subscription to the commercial forms. We often use non-CAR forms in commercial. But now that we're logged in, I have a, here, let me just find one of my many samples. So there are 3 buyer representation agreements. We're gonna look at what the, come on. All right, here's the buyer representation agreement. This is one I've never used, but it's called the buyer representation agreement, non-exclusive and not for compensation. And it starts off with agency disclosure, which, by the way, isn't a bad way to introduce the topic. because it makes it clear that the listing agent works for the seller and is obligated to get the seller the best price and terms. I'm going to be your agent. I'll represent you to help you get the best price and terms. And if it happens to be an EXP listing that you're buying, then we, in the royal sense, we at EXP Realty will be representing both the buyer and the seller. Do you understand? Okay, cool. And then there's a copy of the civil code. There's the fair housing. There's the, here we are, the buyer representation agreement. Now, notice it says non-exclusive and not for compensation. So this document does not say that the buyer can't work with other agents. That's sort of a problem. Also, it doesn't say that the buyer owes you any money, not for compensation. So, well, what does it say? And by the way, most of this is included in the other versions. What it basically does is it explains the different kinds of relationships that real estate agents can have. It talks about broker authorizations and obligations, scope of duty, what the buyer is supposed to do. There are some forms. Here it is, sign, buyer investigation advisory. These are all things I'm going to help you with. Here we are, sign, cool. Of the three, this is the easiest to get people to sign. And you're going to see why, because it doesn't talk about compensation, right? It doesn't talk about compensation. The number 2 agreement is called the Buyer Representation Agreement, non-exclusive. Now, what the Buyer Representation Agreement, non-exclusive, first of all, it looks an awful lot like the first one. There's agency relationships, civil code, fair housing, buyer representation agreement. But here's the difference. Now, let's just go through this because this will be the same on the third one. The first of it is the name of the buyer, the name of the broker, not your name, beginning on today. So this is a question I get, well, how long should we make it for? Now, when I originally was doing this, I used to say to the buyer, well, give me your time frame. Like how soon do you need to be in a house? Now, usually they don't want to be pressured. So they'll say, oh, well, we don't have to move right away. We 4 months, 6 months, 6 months. Okay. So then I would put in 6 months, right? I would add 6 months. Sometimes buyers would say, well, you mean we're locked into using you as our real estate agent for 6 months, no matter what? Is that what this is saying? 6 months, no matter what? Well, that's one of the objections. Now, what I would do if I got the objection is I would be willing to put in, first of all, I learned that if I shortened the time period to 30 days, I used to do it. I had people that it was a battle to get them to sign it. And I would say, how about 3 weeks? How about 2 weeks? And if everything is going well, that way you can test out the system. And if you're happy and everything is going well, then we can extend it if you're not happy. But then I would also put in what I would call a weasel out clause, a easy exit clause. And it says that if this is not working out and you wish to cancel, all you have to do is give me a week's notice and we'll end as friends. I would say it's the difference between going steady with somebody versus being married, right? When we sign this, we're just going steady. You can break it off whenever you want to. We're not married. Now, if you understand, I wouldn't necessarily always bring that up unless they raise the objection. But this is one of the pressure points is how long do you make this for? If you make it for too long, sometimes people are like, well, that's too, I mean, what if we're not getting along? What if you're not doing a good job? What then? What if we're not happy? Right? And if there's no out, it's going to be harder to get them to sign it. I originally wanted it for a long time. I realized that the shorter I made the representation period for, the easier it was to get them to sign it. Then the question is property to be required, location, San Francisco Bay Area, Northern California, San Diego. we want to be kind of broad in that explanation, in that description. Because if I say Blossom Valley, a neighborhood of San Jose, and then they want to buy a property in the Santa Teresa neighborhood of San Jose, but you understand, a lot of this is just, talk, because we're not doing this to sue somebody. Does everybody understand why are we doing this? Because it'll protect us from the listing agent. And by the way, the listing agent is often your enemy. Do not let your clients meet the listing agent without you being there unless you know the listing agent and trust them. I'm just telling you, because the listing agent, because they're getting both, if they double-ended, they have a lot of flexibility on the commission, right? So what this does, by having an agreement, it protects us from the listing agent, but we're not going to sue them anyhow. What type of property, single family, price range, whatever, this can be for a specific property. So if the buyer wants you to help them buy a particular house that's not in the MLS, this would be where you could put in a specific property. Now, so we go through the form. Most of this, we don't need to, we're not going to do a list. This is the same. You're not going to pick single agency. What it says is there's a possible dual agency. Don't check these other boxes, right? Just don't check them, because most brokers list homes and work with buyers. EXP does. So just leave paragraph 2C the way it is. Just don't check these boxes. Don't check them. Now, this is where the second pressure point comes, because the way both of the buyer representation agreements that involve compensation are structured is what it's basically saying is that the buyer owes you and your broker a commission. And it's got the magic words. California Civil Code says any enforceable agreement to pay a real estate agent a commission has to, number one, be in writing, and number two, has to contain certain magic words. And the California Civil Code lists these words. And it says they have to be in Helvetica, minimum 10-point boldface type. That's what it says. Now, what are you going to put in? 3%? How about that? Would you like 4? How about 6? Well, so let's say you put in 3%. You type in 3%. I want 3%. All right, I'm going to check the box. I want 3%. Now, assuming, let's say your buyer is reading this contract and the buyer says, well, wait a second. This says that I owe you 3%. Later, it says that if the seller pays us, then you get credit for what the seller pays. But then they say, well, wait a second. But what if you're only getting paid 2.5%? What does that mean? And what it means is, oops, let me go back. Why did I do that? I didn't need to do that, but I did it anyhow. Let me just do this. I don't know. Right, back here. All right. So what if the MLS says 2.5 or 2.25, and you've written in 3? What this contract says, the buyer is obligated to make up the difference. Now that might make you happy as an agent. Could that be a hard sell to your buyer? That in addition to their down payment and other closing costs, they're going to have to write you a check for $5,000 or something like that. Does everybody see the problem with this? If you say, well, let's say I put in a low number, 2%. Later, it would say, well, what if there's more? But what we usually do is we check box number 3 and we put in something like this: commission paid to the MLS. Now, for those lawyers out there, I want you to know that what that does is this makes this not a contract that you could go to court, because the damages, which is what you would be owed if the buyer were not to work with you, is extremely unclear. And you've said you're going to be paid through the multiple listing service, which means you aren't being paid by the buyer. Which then begs the question, what are we doing? Right? But then if they sign it, right, there's no risk to them in signing that. Now, what makes this one different from the other one, and I'm going to do the other one, is that, let me see, where is it say? What the non-exclusive one, which is the one we're looking at right now, what it says is you're owed a commission if you introduce the buyer to the property or negotiate on the buyer's behalf. That's what the non-exclusive says. By the way, we use this oftentimes with investors, right? It says, if I find you the property, you agree that I'm going to be paid a commission. But if the buyer finds a for sale by owner on their own, if the buyer buys a new home subdivision, if the buyer goes to an open house you didn't introduce them to, see something on Zillow that you never showed them, and they buy the property, there's no obligation for you to get paid. There's no obligation. You have to find the property or negotiate on their behalf. So which of these forms do agents want to use? They want to use the big one. And the big one is the buyer representation agreement exclusive. And the difference between these two, there isn't a lot of difference between the two, except the difference between the two is this one says, if the buyer buys anything within the time period mentioned here, whether they found it, whether it was a new home subdivision, whether it was on the MLS or not, if they find anything, they owe you a commission. Do you understand? If a buyer is reading this and you say 6 months and you've got 3%, and they read it, they might be going, well, this doesn't sound very good, right? But again, if we put in box number 3, the only parts of this form you really need to focus on are property to be acquired. Paragraph 1A, you need to fill that out. Because if you leave it private, people say, what if I leave it blank? Go ahead, leave it blank. But you understand this makes it a worthless contract when it comes to enforcing it in a court of law, but we're not going to do that anyhow. Remember, the goal of doing this is so that the buyer feels committed and it protects you from the evil listing agent. Protects you. Right? Because if I'm the listing agent and I say, are you working with an agent yet? And they say, well, yes, we've got a guy, his name is Fidel, he's been helping us. And I say, oh, really? So you've got like an exclusive arrangement with Fidel, right? That you're not going to work with anyone else? Have you signed anything? Now, do you understand if they say, well, no, we never discussed an exclusive arrangement and we never signed anything, if I'm the listing agent, I can just go for it. But if they say, well, yeah, we did sign this buyer representation agreement, now I know as a listing agent, I got to be careful. Because even though the lawsuit isn't going to happen, the MLS and the Association of Realtors are going to be very angry with me if I steal Fidel's client. And he shows and he says, look, I got a buyer representation agreement and they said they told you, and you understand, I could get thrown out of the MLS and out of the Association of Realtors because it violates the code of ethics for me to do this. So what else? We down here to paragraph 3, there isn't a lot of other things, right? Now, this is a sample form. This extra 30 days that I wrote in is what's called a protection period. Like if I introduce somebody to the property and within 30 days after this is over, they buy, then, you know, you owe me a commission, but we're not going to sue anybody for a commission anyhow. Right? Most of the rest of this is just stuff. Now, on the plus side, and the plus side is a minus also. This is a relatively long, very official looking contract. Just that part is 4 pages long. Now, either the buyer's not going to read it at all and just sign it. Yay. Or they're going to read it and have questions. So what are your other options? One of the other things, is there any questions about that? The first buyer representation agreement just says what agents do, what buyers do, but it doesn't make any kind of an exclusive commitment, which is what we want. Second one says, you are committed to me on any properties I show you or negotiate on your behalf. And the third one says, you're obligated to use me any property you buy, new home subdivisions. Right, but we're putting in that you're compensated through the MLS because it gives us a way out of discussing what the commission the buyer owes you. These forms were really written for non-MLS properties. If a buyer says to me, the property I want is not on the market, it's a very particular model of a particular neighborhood, and I want you to contact every owner in that area that has that property and see if they'll sell it to me, I would be telling them, I'm willing to go digging for you, but you're going to have to sign an agreement to work with me. Where does it say that you're going to be paid a commission if you have a buyer? The answer is it's in the MLS. So for sale by owners, there's no agreement to pay you a commission. Expired listings, there's no agreement to pay you a commission. New home subdivisions that aren't in the MLS, many of them aren't, no agreement to pay you a commission. You go find the model they're looking for and find a seller that's willing to sell it, there's no agreement to pay you a commission. Does everybody see that if they're asking you to find what we call off-market non-MLS properties, you want them to agree that you're going to be paid a commission? Now, I've got other classes on this because when we find the seller, we would use a single party compensation agreement and get the seller to pay the commission anyhow. But if you don't have a buyer representation agreement, you don't want to introduce your buyer to a non-MLS seller. Because if they make a deal without you, there's no way you're going to get paid a commission. What, you're going to hire a lawyer, really, and sue them? Good luck with that. So one of the other options, any questions with that? I know I see some chat. Let me see. How about the beginning and end date? I think I did that. Should an agent hosting an open house ask it? Yes, I have a list of 8 questions that you ought to ask at an open house. Are you working with another agent yet? What is the longest we can represent a buyer or seller? There is no period in the law or anything like that. But then, you know, how long would you agree to be locked into one real estate agent? With a buyer, what happens if another agent, not the listing agent, write the offer and sells to the buyer? Does the agent have to pay me? That's a very good question, Audrey. That would only be in a procuring cause dispute, which would be a dispute with the Board of Realtors and the MLS. But I'm telling you, I've been through this. The California Association of Realtors has a legal Q&A on procuring cause disputes. The agent who writes the offer, whoever brings the fish to the market, gets to sell the fish. And you can try suing the other agent. I had a listing in Carmel, and a guy made an offer with his own agent, and because of complications, it didn't, wasn't accepted. And he realized, my partner at that time knew the seller. He realized that the only way they were ever going to buy this property is if my partner went and presented the offer. And so he called me up and he said, I want you guys to write the offer. They've already written an offer on this property. We wrote the offer. It was accepted, right? He was right. My partner could get it accepted. It was accepted. They filed the complaint against us. They lost, even though they had already written an offer on the same property. I had an exclusive agreement with the buyer and introduced them to a home and talked about it. This was for 3 months. They opted not to make an offer because they thought it would sell 10 days later through another agent. You can try But the question about the other agent is, did the other agent know that there was a buyer representation agreement? Of course, the agent's going to say, I didn't know, right? They're going to say, I didn't know. And unless the buyers say, yeah, I told them, and they said, don't worry, I could do it anyhow. It's, you might have a leg to stand on, but it may not help you hopping around. Any other questions? You guys can speak if you want to as well. Procuring cause is right. Does everybody understand my story? I was a co-listing agent. They had written an offer on that house with their agent. Wasn't accepted. They asked us to write the offer. It was accepted. The other agent complained to the board of realtors and lost. All right. You know what I'm saying? This is very hard to collect. All right. Now, if you want to get your feet wet, is that the right? I don't know if that's the right word. One of the things that I've used in the past, if all we're doing is getting them to sign something so that they feel committed, right? And by the way, as some of you have already pointed out, you've had buyer representation agreements and still didn't get paid, right? There's no guarantee. But if all we want to do is to formalize our agreement, I'm going to be your agent. I'm your agent, aren't I? Right? And they're like, yeah, you're my agent. This is what I call a service guarantee. I used to call it a loyalty pledge, but that sort of sounds like I'm working, in a spy agency. I don't know. I used to call it a real estate service pledge, but people didn't know what pledge meant. So what I changed it to was a real estate service guarantee. This is my guarantee of service to you as a buyer. This is my guarantee. Here are all the things that I'm going to do to help you get the best deal possible when you're buying a house. This is the list. And what I'm asking for you is to do these things and to work exclusively with me during the term of this agreement. You sign, I sign, and there we go. Is this a legally enforceable contract? No. Why not? Number one, it doesn't mention commission. Right? You understand, in order for the buyer to be obligated or anybody to be obligated to pay you something, the contract has to be definite and certain as to the damages. Number two, it's missing the magic words. Notice the amount or rate of commission is not set by law and can be negotiated between the client and the broker. Right? Those words are not there in Helvetica 10-point boldface type. They're not there. Right? Not there. But what this does is it formalizes the process. And when the listing agent says, well, did you agree to work exclusively with Mike? And they're like, well, yeah, actually we did. Did you sign something? They'll say, yeah, actually we did. Now, if the listing agent is pushy, they might say, show me what you signed. And if they look at this, they're going to say, this doesn't do it. But why else are we doing it? Is it good to do this? The answer is yes. What is important is that you have the conversation. You present to them the reasons why. This is what you have to sell them. Having one agent who knows and understands what you're looking for and is committed to helping you find it is going to produce better results for you than a bunch of different agents that don't really know and understand and aren't as committed. That's the whole point that this turns on. And if you can convince them of that, then they'll sign the agreement. Right? Well, they're more likely to sign the agreement. Let's see, is there another chat? Do we have copies of these documents? Yes, they're in the chat, I believe. And yes, you can have copies of these agreements. Okay? I mean, you all owe me $1, or you have to leave in my name. And you should put in your California Department of Real Estate number, because it'll make your broker happy, and the Department of Real Estate, should anybody ever show it to them. work on your presentation, explaining the benefits. All right. What else do we have? How about beginning and ending? Are we good? Was that enough for this one thing? I don't usually trip about the whole buyer representation agreements because the only thing it's really doing is protecting us from the listing agent. But then again, you might need protection from the listing agent. Comments, criticisms, suggestions? No? All right. Okay. Next week, we're going to talk about scripts. I am going to circle around and do scripts on buyer representation in terms of the consultation, right? This was mostly about getting it set up and going through the agreements and explaining what they do mean and what they don't mean. And we're going to be doing a series on buyers. I hope to see you there. Everybody have a great afternoon. See you later.
Thank you.
People can't talk.
Yes, thank you. Thank you,
You're
Michael.
welcome. This was good. Thank you.
All right. Coolio. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
You're welcome. That's what I've been waiting for. Say something nice. All right.